Welcome to this episode of the Martial Truth Podcast, my interview with Sensei Bruce Heilman. I've known Sensei Heilman for several years. Met him originally with his teacher, Sensei Odo, back at one of Sensei Adler's seminars years ago when he came in. He's a great guy, great martial artist. So hope you enjoy the interview. Interesting insights on Kobudo and different things. So I think people will enjoy it. I know I enjoyed talking to him. All right. I want to thank everybody. We surpassed 15,000 subscribers, so now on to 20,000. All right. That's the next goal. So I want to thank all of you. Without you guys, I couldn't keep doing this. And I really appreciate it. All right. We're also at 130 members, so that's fantastic. I really appreciate all you guys. Okay. So again, please click that like, share, subscribe button. We're constantly fighting the YouTube algorithm. All right. So hopefully now that we hit 15,000, maybe we'll see a little bit of change in that. But I really appreciate all you guys for sticking with me and following the channel. All right. So I'll be in Okinawa when this drops. Okay. So when you're watching this, I'm in Okinawa. All right. Hopefully having a good time and getting some stuff done. And really looking forward to that. So I'll do a podcast on it when I get back. And don't forget, I'll be in New York next month teaching a series of seminars at Seishinkan East, run by my student James Waller. If you're on Facebook, you could find the event that he posted. If not, I'll put a link to it in the description. All right. So please enjoy my interview with Bruce Heilman.
And named what he was doing as Okinawa Kenpo. But he didn't name it to be a name of a style. He was trying to be, he's old school, and he was trying to say first way of Okinawa.
Right.
Because all his teachers were Tei.
Right. Right.
And then he got involved with Zenpo, Zenro Shimabuku, and he and Zenro were made co-directors of the All Japan Karate-Do Federation Special Okinawa District that Kenko Toyama had set up. That only lasted a few years. And then in 55, I think it was, he established with Zenpo the Okinawa Kenpo Karate Renmei. And again, trying to pull everybody together.
Right.
And that lasted until 69 when he passed, and then 70 Zenpo passed. So that was the main thing. His major contribution, I think, was he really pushed the use of the Bogu gear for kumite.
Right.
So he was not a advocate of the Japanese no contact or light contact sparring. He wanted to put the gear on, winners standing, losers down.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because we know Tatsuo Shimabuku experimented with it too in Isshinryu. We have photos of him actually refereeing matches where the Marines are in full Bogu, and they're fighting on Okinawa. And I also find it interesting that you guys also have Kobudo, right? So
yes.
It's interesting. I see some kind of very similar, a lot of similarities in that, you've got karate and you've got Kobudo, and it's a complete system. It's not, like a lot of the other styles, they may have one or two Kobudo kata that they do. But I know in the Okinawan Kenpo Kobudo and in the Isshinryu, we have a pretty vast Kobudo curriculum as well as an empty hand curriculum, which I found kind of interesting. So was it Odo that brought the Kobudo in, or did Nakamura bring the Kobudo in?
Primarily, Nakamura had some of his own Kobudo, but very limited. And Odo Sensei's background was unique. He came up through the Okinawan style of having a number of teachers.
Right.
He first started out with a gentleman by the name of Koho Kuba. And he was 1864 to 1944 time frame there. At 19 years of age, then he got directly under Nakamura, Shiguro Nakamura.
Right.
But in addition to that, he continued to train with others. So he trained with Seki Toma, who
Right.
was a direct student of Kian. He trained Shinpo Matayoshi for
Right.
the Kobudo and Michio Kakaizu.
Right.
Uh, and in fact, he ended up being the vice president of Matayoshi's organization for a period of
Okay.
time. So as Nakamura got older, he started to ask Oto Sensei to introduce the Kobudo into his karate program. And so that's how it became part of the Okinawa Kenpo
Okay.
program, in that he brought the whole system in. The Kobudo that he does, I refer to it as the Odo lineage.
Right.
Just as you have the Matayoshi lineage, the Tara lineage, the Yamane lineage, it's different.
Right.
Although about 2/3 of our katas come from Matayoshi lineage, which you
Right.
practice,
Right.
but they're similar in pattern, but not in execution. We have Taira, we have Yamane, and we have Matayoshi katas, but our stancing is Odoized. So his was a predominant use of Seisan Dachi and a lot of hip movement and shifting. So where you and the Tara people basically go Zenkutsu Dachi,
Right.
Zenkutsu Dachi, we'll stay in Seisan, work the hip, and
Right.
combine those movements.
So it's interesting because that's kind of what we're doing in Ishinru, in the Ishinru Kobudo. One of my problems with the Ishinru Kobudo is most of the Ishinru people are not very good at it. Um, One, for lack of proper instruction. I mean, one of the things Tatsuo would tell some of the first generation guys that, listen, if you want to be really good at Kobudo, you should seek out a Kobudo master. And, some of those guys did that. They trained with other Kobudo masters on Okinawa, and their Ishinru Kobudo is a lot better, right? Winkler being one of those guys, he studied with
Yes.
Kotaro Iha. And Kotaro Iha is another guy who studied with Matayoshi Sensei and other Kobudo masters and kind of is doing his own version of the Kobudo kata and the way, and put his stamp on it also. So, it's kind of a common thing, it seems to be, where people will study with various people on Okinawa and then kind of do a little bit of their own thing or their own variation. I mean, it was also my understanding that Odo Sensei briefly also studied with Tatsuo Sensei in Ishinru.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I have a photo where he's attending a party of all of like the past Tatsuo students. And
Yes.
at that, I have a photo where he actually stands up at one point and said, I studied with Tatsuo and, briefly. So it's just interesting. And, I think it's a modern thing where we only train with one guy. I
Right.
think, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know myself, I trained with a lot of different Ishinru instructors and Kobudo teachers. Obviously Ishinru is my style, the style of karate that I do, but I've had influences from other things. My Kobudo has had influences from other things, and I've had multiple Kobudo instructors too. Um, but it's funny, where it's almost become like, I like to say it's become like a brand, right? So,
Yeah.
you're either a Coke guy or a Pepsi guy, right? You can't be both, and I think that's a bit of a problem, I think. I think we're better for it when we get input from different people, not just one person, you know. Um, do you know Isawi Ray?
No, I don't.
Yeah, he lived in the States for a while. I believe he was Okinawan Kempo. I think he studied also with I met him through Gakia Sensei and Matayoshi. And the reason I met him was he spoke perfect English. So Gakia didn't speak English, so Gakia called him, had him come over, and he was translating. Um, so I'm pretty sure he had studied because I was up in his dojo. I think he's kind of retired. He had some health issues, but there were photos of Nakamura Sensei up on the wall and stuff. So he was also Okinawa Kempo. So what kata do you guys practice in terms of empty hand?
Well, before you get that, let me just say your
Sure.
point about not studying with others in the States that at the view. And it's interesting that in the Okinawa Kempo and then the Okinawa Kempo Karate Do League, that Nakamura would have gatherings and he would have basically that train in technique and then they'd put the gear on and fight. But he had Uehara Sensei, he had Matayoshi Sensei, and you had Toma, and you had uh, all the guys coming together and just sharing. And when we started to bring Oda Sensei over in the early 80s, uh, I carried the same thing on with our annual trainings. Our annual trainings are just an opportunity to get multiple senior teachers to come in and share, not teach different kata, but to teach application,
Right.
to teach technique and theory. Odo Sensei loved it, but initially I got a lot of heat from fellow Okinawa Kempo practitioners. How dare I do that? It
Right.
should only be Odo Sensei.
Right.
But Odo Sensei said, Bruce-san, this way Nakamura do, you continue.
Right.
I like.
Right.
And yes, that's the only way you gain. You're Ishinu, I'm Okinawa Kempo, but you learn so much by looking at other options or other viewpoints of how to do the same things we're doing, but we're doing it in a different way. Because of the coming through the Ichu Middle School, our katas, our open hand katas, are what I'd call fistic, where if you look at some of the katas that come from some of the other Shornu systems, such as Soken or etc., you're going to see a lot more of the open hand, eye gouges, etc. in there. Well, they were teaching little kids, they made a fist.
Right.
We see those little things, but if I watch those katas, I can see things that are in our katas.
Right.
You asked about our open hand. We have 19 open hand katas.
Okay.
The typical Naihanshis, 3 of them.
Right.
5 Pinans. We have Wansu, Seisan, Shinto, Sanshin, Pasai, Nisei-shi, 2 Goju-shihos, Kusanku, and Tensho.
Okay.
Open hand, weapons, we have 35.
Right. It's a lot.
Right. Odo's favorite weapon, obviously, was the bow. We have 13 bow forms.
Okay.
We have 3 tunfa. We have 5 sai, 2 kama, 1 nunchaku. He hated the nunchaku.
Yeah. Well, I was just teaching. I was working. I do a lot of Zoom classes. I was just working with a student this morning from Ohio, and I'm just finishing him up on the Matayoshi nunchaku kata. And one of the things I mentioned to him, virtually every nunchaku kata is modern. It's not, they're not ancient kata. And again, like I tell people, that's not a big deal because the techniques are old. The techniques are old. That, I think people get hung up on, the kata, I want it to be 300 years old. It doesn't matter how old the kata is. It matters that the techniques are ancient that are in the kata. Whether the kata was created last week or 300 years ago, I don't think that necessarily matters as long as the techniques are actually viable. But it's funny he didn't like the nunchaku because Matayoshi, I think, had a different nunchaku kata early on, and then he settled on the one we all do now. So it's funny how that kind of seemed to go in a transition too.
We have Eku, Nuntebo, Timbe Rochin, Kua, and then we have 5 2-person forms.
Okay.
So Bobo, Bosai, Bo Kama, Bo Tunfa, and then Bo Timbe Rochin.
Okay.
And a lot of our bow forms are multi-weapon capable. So like Chonoko, we can do that with the Nunte bow. We can do that with the Yari. We can do it with Naginata. Odo also did, although we didn't have katas for it, he did a number of other, you might call them weapons, such as a tree knot.
Okay.
He would take knotted rope. He would basically use just about anything and turn it into a weapon and work drills with you on those things. So it's interesting. And we also carry the Bogu Kumite concept forward, and we do a lot of weapons kumite.
Okay.
So we dress up like Michelin men and ladies in street hockey gear. And I'll make, for the bows, I took 2 shinai with a piece of PVC in the center, so you can beat the heck out of each other.
Right.
So we modify other weapons with some from piping, foam piping, and just go at it and have fun. And so just carrying on that Bogo Kumite aspect.
So can I ask you a question? Because someone wanted me to ask you a question about a
Sure.
particular weapon in your art. So it's the Tekko, and they
Yes.
wanted to ask what you knew about Kakazu Mitsuo.
Well, Mitsu Kakazu Sensei, I got to meet him in '95 in Okinawa. Oda Sensei, one of our trips, took me to a tournament to specifically meet him because he was one of Oda Sensei's weapons teachers. He was a Shorin practitioner and he did Mariyoshi Kobudo. Uh, and he was a little bit bigger than Oda Sensei by about maybe half a foot, a little huskier. He was a retired gardener
Okay.
uh, and an excellent practitioner, and he was one of probably a more influential on Oda Sensei's Kobudo than Mariyoshi Senior, just
Okay.
because of the age difference. So we have one of our Tekos forms comes from um, um, the sort of similar to what everybody else is doing from Taira, and the second one comes from Kakaizu.
Right. So is that have you seen the one that some of the Mariyoshi people do?
Yes, I've seen one kata that the Mariyoshi people do. It's different
Okay.
than that.
Yeah. So
Um,
yeah,
it's a
it's
similar
inter
kata though that Doug Perry. I was down to Little Okinawa and he asked me to teach a number of things, and one of the things he wanted me to teach was our second Teko kata, and I started out doing that, and had about 50 of his black belts there, and we got through about 8, 9 moves, and everybody starts giggling a bit. Well, it turned out it was basically the same kata that he had been taught by another teacher, not Kakaizu, but
okay.
it was put into Nagasato stancing
Okay.
versus our stancing, but the Embusade was the same. It was the
Okay.
same pattern and everything else.
So it's
Uh,
interesting. When I was training with Gakiya Yoshiaki, I asked him about Tekko, and he kind of went like this. He went, he's like, Matayoshi Sensei say Seisan. So I said, do he goes, all the styles, all karate styles have Seisan kata. He said, so Matayoshi Sensei said you could do Seisan with Tekko. He says, just do that kata utilizing the Tekko. Right. So it's interesting, right? So some people in Mariyoshi still do that old, and I practice that old kata too, the other Tekko kata that you could see on
mhm,
video from the early 1980s or 1970s. Um and then sometimes I just do it with Seisan kata just because that Gakiya said it, to train it that way that Mariyoshi sensei suggested it, right? Um
mhm.
if you think about it, the weapon, I mean, really, it's kind of brass knuckles. It's not like it's overly complicated in terms of what to do with it, unlike some of the other weapons, which you have to really, know what you're doing to be able to handle them well.
Mhm.
So, so what was training with Odo Sensei like?
It was a blast. He I've trained with other Okinawan and Japanese teachers, and in many cases they were very structured and strict, and some of them had you don't ask them a direct question, you have to go through the hierarchy. Odo Sensei just loved to share. It didn't matter whether it was a white belt out there or a Kyoshi. He just shared. When he would come over, his whole existence was training, eating, sleeping. He would come over for 2 weeks. I would gain 25 pounds just taking him to eat.
He wouldn't.
He wouldn't. He had a hyperthyroid condition. So he just ate and ate and ate, and then would train. And it was fantastic because he just loved to do it. He loved to share and fix. He had unique ways of, I'd call it nonverbal communication. He'd line everybody up. You're in a stance. If he didn't like the stances, he'd take a bow, he'd come down the line and just drop the bow. And if you didn't have your knee bent enough and the toes tucked in, you banged on your foot. Well,
Right.
you can hit one or two people and the entire line adjusted correctly. And they go, no, you understand. he always giggled and had a good time. Um, so it it was a great opportunity. His classes were relaxed, not a structured, um, and he just really pushed kata almost to a detriment. If you look at the perpetuation of the system, his concern was because most of his people in Okinawa, students were military, they're on a tour duty.
Right.
So he was trying to push as much into them as possible. When we got him here in the trainings, we tried to redirect the focus more to drills and application and those things that he wasn't necessarily doing in Okinawa.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that because this is one of my problems right now with Okinawa. Okay. Um, I was lucky. The first time I met Gakia Sensei was in 1997 at the grand opening of the Budokan. I went over, the Matayoshi and the Ryukyu Kobudo people both did seminars, and I took both those seminars. I'd had a bad experience with a Matayoshi teacher here, Mikio Nishiuchi, right?
Yes.
Wasn't what he claimed to be. So I went over there and I said, oh, I'll take seminars with both. The Ryukyu people are Taira, that's the Ishinru lineage. Matayoshi, I've been training for several years. Let me go and I'll take both and decide who I want to kind of gravitate towards. And I like the Matayoshi group, so I went with them. And I introduced myself to Gakia Sensei. He told me to come to the Kodokan. I went and trained. And so that first time just reviewing kata, that kind of stuff, there's a lot of people there from all over the world. And then he started coming into the States. And when he started coming into the States, obviously it was, we do the basics and we do kata and stuff. Then he started coming to New York and, so we'd done a bunch of things. Now in New York, he started really going into application. So I was the benefit of that a lot where in New York, the last several times I trained, whether it was in New York or in Okinawa, yeah, we might review some kata, but then it was application. He was going over, showing how to fight with the weapons, how to do this, how to do that. And that's one of the things that I think the Okinawan sensei have to kind of change a little bit is
Mm-hmm.
that when, you go there or you attend a workshop or a seminar with them, you do basics and you do kata. But we all know the basics and we all know the kata. We could do that a million times in our own dojo, right? I mean, let's get into some meat and potatoes. Let's do some application. And that's one of the things I'm noticing, I think is a problem. And that's why I think there's a problem on Okinawa where you don't have as much interest in the martial arts as say 25, 30, 50 years ago, right? I mean, how big is Okinawa Kempo on Okinawa?
Not that big.
Yeah, it's like Ishinru. Ishinru's the same way, you know.
Yeah, and in fact, there's been a resurgence a bit. Good friend of mine, Toro Kian, his teacher was Tokumitsu Kina. Kina Sensei just passed recently. He was the last of the senior original OGs under
Okay.
under Nakamura.
Okay.
And an interesting story. That same tournament, I met Michio Kakaizu. We were sitting at the table, and there's a little Okinawan sitting next to me. And I didn't realize I didn't get introduced to him until later when I first got with Kian Sensei. Realized that was Kina. That was his teacher.
Oh, okay.
And so we made connection there. Uh, Kian is teaching a number of seminars, but what's most exciting for me is that Taketo Moore, who passed, his son has reopened his father's dojo.
Okay.
So the Nakamura dojo has been reopened, and Masuda Sensei, who was a ninth dan under Taketo and also studied with Odo
Okay.
weapons, is designated as a senior teacher.
Okay.
So we're seeing a resurgence and they're starting to do seminars. So that's exciting for me. In fact, this next fall, we're going to have about 20 people going over to
Oh,
this.
good.
So there is a resurgence, but it's small. Most of the others, like Mayahara Sensei passed,
Right.
Jinin passed, Oyata's over here, but he passed. Uh, Taketo passed. So you have some Okinawa Kempo in Japan,
Right.
uh, but in Okinawa it was small. So I'm
Right.
seeing a resurgence of it.
Good. Yeah, I mean, look, I've been going to Okinawa since '91, and and I've had these discussions with senior teachers there when I've been there that, the problem is they lose the kids once the kids hit middle school. And one of the things, and I've talked about this on a podcast before, is they've made it too much of that it's a sport.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at martial arts, I know you still compete in tournaments. God bless you, right? That you're getting out there and doing stuff. That's very impressive, right? And I have no problem with having a sport aspect to karate. But when you compare karate as a sport to like basketball or soccer or baseball, karate's a pretty boring sport. The kid gets up, he does one kata for maybe a minute or two. If he loses, that's it. He's done for the day. That was his big competing time. If he fights and he loses his first match, okay, the fight maybe lasted 2 minutes. He's finished. And now he's competed a total of 4 minutes and an 8 hour tournament. And, that's one of the things I tried to bring up to some senior teachers in Okinawa that, in my dojo in New York, we don't do karate as a sport. We'll go to the Ishinru World Championships every 2 years and bring some people if they want to go. We don't make it a requirement, but we don't do it as a sport. We do it as self-defense, even for the little kids. And we get a lot of kids that start with us at 4 and they stay with us till they go off to college, right? And many of them
Mm-hmm.
come back after they get back from college. And what I tried to explain to them in Okinawa is, you guys took the seriousness away from it. When you focused so much on the sport, well, it's not serious. It's not about a way of life, a life protection art, right? And a couple of the senior teachers said to me, we think you're right. And do you know Yogi Sensei?
Yes.
Okay, so I asked Yogi Sensei the last time I was in Okinawa in 2015. I said to him, "What's the difference between when you started karate?" Now he's in his mid 90s, right? He said, "Michael, when I started karate, we were told that when you put your hand on your door to leave the house, you had to be ready." He says, "Now it's who does good at tournaments." He said, "So I don't go to tournaments, so that means I have bad karate." So everything's based on tournaments now in Okinawa. And he said Okinawa has painted itself into this corner. How are they going to get out of it? He says, I don't know. And now they've expanded it to tourism. Now karate's become a big tourism thing there. That's what I'm curious to see when I go on Wednesday. Um, I'm gonna be hanging out with Pat McCarthy while I'm there a lot. He's gonna take me around, and he told me I'm gonna be surprised by some of the things I see. So okay, so we'll see
Mm-hmm.
what the story is. When was the last time you were there?
uh, like 96.
Okay, so it's been a while. Oh,
Yes. I don't
when you
know.
if you go next year, oh my God, you're not going to believe the changes. You're going to literally think you're in a different place. I mean, because I've been going since '91. I think this is going to be my sixth trip, and I couldn't believe even the first couple of years how much it changed there. And now they have the Kaikan. They opened up the Karate Kobudo Kaikan. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the house for karate and
Yeah.
Kobudo. So when I was there, they had the Budokan open in '97. I demonstrated at the grand opening. I represented Shimabuku Kichiro's dojo. That was a phenomenal event. Uh, but now they have the Kaikon, which from what I understand is amazing. I mean, supposedly it's just absolutely beautiful. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Um, but that's exciting that you're going to go back though. I mean, I think it's great.
Yeah. It's because all my trips, our 6 trips, were like from 83 to 96.
Right.
Um, and so it'll be nice. The one thing I noticed, even in that time frame, was the explosive growth of pachinko parlors that came on. Where in the early 80s, you didn't see it.
So
In the 90s, they were everywhere.
yeah, so when you say that, right? 91, when I first went to Okinawa, I got there and Master Shimabuku pointed one of them out to me. He said he speaks English, so he says, Michael. I said, yeah. He says, don't go in there. Bad. He goes, organized crime. I says, yeah, I didn't plan on going in there. I'm not a gambler. I wasn't planning on going in
Yep.
there. He says, yeah, stay out of those. He says, not good. And yeah, I was surprised at how many of them there were. So
Yep.
yeah, you know. Um, but the person I wanted to know about Kakazu Sensei was Yannick Schultz, who's one of the younger researchers that's doing a lot of research in Okinawan karate. He's published some really good articles and stuff. Um, we have a handful of these guys that are very serious historians. I've interviewed a bunch of them on the channel. As I've said, what I'm trying to do with this channel is to interview people to expand people's horizons on different things, what they think they know about martial arts and martial arts history, and just introduce them to other people. So they, not just Ishinru guys. I don't want to just do that. Not just Matayoshi Kobudo. I want to introduce a wide range of guys, and that's why I thought about you. We had
Hmm.
met at that one sensei thing. And I'm trying to think. I kind of remember that I thought I was with you one time when Odo Sensei came up to Adler's. Is that
We brought
possible?
him up. I think so.
I think I did the Tonfacata with you guys. We walked through the Tonfacata. I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure. And I remember thinking, oh, this is very similar to the Matayoshi
Hmm.
Tuifacata, Tonfacata. So, and I remember how nice Odo Sensei was. I mean, I didn't really interact with him or anything, but seemed like, and that's one of the things, it's interesting, right? I mean, being around a long time, you hear, it's very rare where you hear nothing but good things about a guy. And Odo is one of those guys. Like I've never run into someone if his name comes up, if we're discussing whatever, nobody ever says, "Oh yeah, that guy, he was," no, everybody goes, "Oh, he's such a nice guy." That's almost always the
Hmm.
thing that comes out after you mention his name. Oh, Odo, he's such a nice guy. And yeah, I remember, when you met me, you gave me a copy of the DVD of the Techo form before I
Yeah.
left. You gave me a copy of it, right? And I remember checking it out. And yeah, I'm fascinated. McCarthy Sensei taught me a Yamani Rubo form years ago. I don't go crazy practicing it, but I still practice it. Um,
Hmm.
Ishinru's the Ishinru Kobudo's interesting because we have the Tokumini no Kun from Kion Sensei. And then we have the kata from Taira, right? And then we have the one kata that Tatsuo made himself, Kusan Kusai.
Yes.
So it's interesting. And I don't know how you feel, but a senior sensei once said to me one time, why do you practice that kobudo? Like his feeling was, you only do kobudo just to see certain things, and then just work on the karate. And my response to him was, well, one is it's fun. And I think a lot of people in martial arts take themselves way too serious and they don't look at the fun aspect of training sometimes. And then the other thing I said about the Kobudo was I always felt it helped to keep me physically fit. You're using all these different weapons. They're using all these different little muscle groups in the body. Kama, you need certain muscles, Sai, certain muscles, Tonqua, certain muscles, Bo,
Hmm.
certain. And I always just felt it kept you extremely physically fit doing the Kobudo. I mean, what are your feelings on that?
I, if I had to choose, and I think Odo Sensei was the same way, uh, Kobudo is my go-to. It's the foundation for everything I do. One of the benefits, I believe, is that when you're doing open hand, if you're a little bit sloppy or your basics aren't that tight, there's not necessarily a downside there.
Right.
When you're doing weapons, there can be an immediate and significant downside
You mean
that
like
is.
when I cut myself with the Kama years ago?
Yes, yes, when you bang in yourself, because you have to have a consistency of your fundamentals, so that when you're swinging that weapon, that you know exactly where it's going and where your body isn't.
Right.
And plus, I see so much of the karate coming from the kodo as the foundation, rather than the other way around. People tend to say, so many people say, "Oh, kobudo is the extension of your open hand techniques," and I disagree with that totally. It's if anything an extension of open hand concepts, not techniques.
Well, the other thing I just want to add to that is I study some Japanese. Koru. So I study Tenshin Shodan Katori Shinto-ryu, which is 600 years old. And they have a jiu-jitsu curriculum, but the system is almost exclusively weapons. And the jiu-jitsu curriculum they have is only like 20 techniques, 24 techniques, and they're very simple techniques. And when discussed it with Sugino Sensei, he basically said, "Well, if you're on a battlefield or you're in combat and you're down to empty hand, you got a problem." And I think a lot of people don't realize that, in terms of combat. So let's take the modern aspect of self-defense out. But let's say these guys that were originally, the warrior class on Okinawa, which, a lot of people don't realize or don't, gloss that over, that, they still want to go with the idea that karate was created by farmers when it wasn't. It was
No.
created by professional warriors, right? So if I'm a professional warrior, do I want to rely on my hands? I don't think so. I think you're taking a big chance. You're going to rely on weapons. And I agree. I think a lot of the empty hand stuff comes out of the weapons training. Like Sherman Harrell, who was an original student of Tatsuo, used to, he came in one time and he bowed in and he started doing Tokumini no Kun as an empty hand kata without the bow in his hand. And we all kinds of looked at him for a second and we looked at each other and then we said, Sensei, you're doing Tokumini no Kun. He goes, yeah, interesting, huh? And so the same way you could do the reverse, right? I mean,
Yep.
you can put sai in your hand and go through any empty hand kata and you have a sai kata. As long as you use the weapon properly, it's totally legit, right? So I agree with you. I think the weapons fighting was given far more precedence early when there was warfare going on in Okinawa. And I think the empty hand stuff, the emphasis on the empty hand stuff comes later. And it's the same in China. So I study two Chinese arts, and we have broadsword and straight sword in the Tai Chi style I do. And my Tai Chi masters told me, he says, these are modern forms. Like they're created in the early part of the 20th century. The techniques are old, but all the techniques were partner practice. He goes, why are you going to practice a weapon in the air when you're going to be fighting a guy for real? So everything was two-man practice, was fight,
Mhm.
where now, like, and I know, right? Now the emphasis is on the is on the kata, and then kind of a lot of the partner work is not practiced enough. The partner work is neglected. And I see that as a huge problem in Ishinru, that the partner work's neglected, especially, with
It's,
the
it's,
weapons.
a, it's a problem across all styles.
Yeah.
I think when I get a little negative from our seminars because I'm called the basics guy. You're always going back to basics. I'm always going back to interpretation to application. But kata, we've been around for long enough that the people have the kata, and we have enough
Right.
senior teachers out there to do that. I find so many of the people in training, even advanced black belts, are very, very limited in their understanding of the kata they're doing. And I spend a lot of time dealing with that. And especially with the weapons, is okay, yeah, you do these katas. Now let's tear them apart. Let's change distance. Let's look at different angles. And let's see what you can do with it. And I mean that's where the depth of the art is, not self-defense. I mean, not the sport. We do the same thing. I don't require anybody to go to tournaments. I went to them just to get Odo Sensei's Kobudo and Karate out there. I've ceased doing that now, retired from that. I had a quadruple bypass last December, so I have to ease off on that a little bit.
How old are you
But
now, Sensei?
I'm going to be 75.
You're hanging
And
in there. That's
Emery's
what counts.
8.
Right.
But we're still out there doing.
Yeah.
Uh, Now we after 53 years of having a dojo here in Reading, and in January I gifted our school to our senior student.
Oh, okay, good.
We still come in. We're still coming in and teaching, but I'm not having to deal with the business side anymore. and I'm doing the stuff that got me involved in it initially. And we're also free us up to travel more to the schools associated with us and teach. So it's a win-win situation totally.
So it's interesting. I mean, when I moved out to Arizona 4 years ago from New York. So, before I left, about 2 years before I left, I got all my black belts together and I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm moving to Arizona within 2 years. You guys need to decide if one of you wants to take over the school and keep it going. That's great. If not, I'm going to close the doors. I'm going to do something out in Arizona. But, and the one guy was like, I'd like to give it a shot. I'd like to try running the school. And it wasn't my most senior guy, but, a couple of my most senior guys were still going to be there. I mean, they said they'd help out, but he would run the business end of it. And he's done a great job. I mean, the school's doing well. I'm going back next month to teach seminars for a week. Um, but it's interesting. When I got out here, me and my wife had planned it. So I have an acre and a quarter. And what I did was I had a building delivered to my property, and that's the dojo. That's where I'm sitting right now talking to you. So, so I have
Yes,
classes.
I watched you building it
Yeah.
on your
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, right? I have, so I have a handful of students out here, about 10 to 12 students. I'm not looking to have the operation I had in New York. I do a lot of Zoom classes, but what's been great for me coming out here is not having to, in New York, it was 7 days a week. The school is open 7 days a week.
Mhm.
So it was a lot, right? And it still is. They're still going 7 days a week there. When I got out here, I'm teaching 4 days a week here. And some days I'm only teaching an hour, right? So I'm not teaching that much. But for me, I've been able to really train myself again. Like you're
Mhm.
talking about, like I've always felt my first instructor in karate, who was not a good human being, not a good individual, who I left eventually. That's what he lost. He lost what he loved about martial arts initially, which was the training, the movement, the practice. He lost that and became a politician and a guy who liked to stand there and count and never do anything. And when I left him, I swore I'd never got like that. And, I realized in New York, having to teach so much, I couldn't devote as much to myself. And now I've gotten out here and I,
Right.
I come out here every day and I train. And when I go back to New York, I'm teaching things and there, people said to me last year, they said, oh, the way you're presenting the material, we've never heard you explain it like that. And some of the stuff you're showing, we've never seen. I said, well, it's a problem. I'm out there and I'm able to train myself and figure things out myself. And I'm working on things out there. And, so it's kind of reignited my love all over again for martial arts. And I think a lot of instructors, I think at a certain point lose that. Um, and I think I understand exactly what you're talking about, where now you're not worrying about the business end. You can just go out there,
Right.
teach, have fun, do your thing. It's like when you're a grandfather. Like I got 4 grandkids, right? Out here. So they come over every Wednesday. I teach the two boys karate. At the end of their visit, we hand them back to their parents and they go home, right? So it's the
Yep.
best of both worlds. We get to hang out with them all day, but we're not raising them, right? And it's kind of the same
Yes.
thing now with martial arts. You know, I mean, yeah, I think it's important to train and keep training because I think once we lose that, it becomes a problem. And look, you're around a long time. You know as well as I that we've seen guys that fall into that trap. Um, and it just doesn't seem to work out well. It just never seems to work out well, you know.
No, I never want to look back. And although you look back and you say, okay, physically, I'm not what I was when I was in my 20s or 30s, but you I'm always looking forward that what I'm doing now is far superior to the understanding and the abilities I had in the past. And I always want to continue to grow and expand. And it's focusing on the little things.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've really got into taking Odo's concepts, but making them mine, taking greater forward. Uh, and so I'm hitting people big on because I have a jujitsu background as well.
Me too. So
So
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
so that's my thing. It's close, it's adapt, it's control with the weapons as well as the open hand. and remove the target, control center line, attack from an angle
Yeah.
is my mantra. And exploring that and taking ideas that come from other teachers that we've had and exploring, well, okay, that's what they do. I don't move that way, but the concept is good. Let me
Right.
play with that. Let me work it and see if I can make it work for me.
So one of the interesting things is I studied a Japanese Koru jiu-jitsu, which I'm teaching out here in Arizona. Sosu Ishido, 400 years old. Um, so one of the things that's come to light recently with these young researchers is Motobu Naoki is another one of the researchers. He's the grandson of Choki Motobu.
Ah,
And he's discovered a link where after the Satsuma basically came to Okinawa, it wasn't once they established their control, it wasn't an adversarial relationship. They needed things from the Okinawans. So there was some cross training. Like there's still Jigenru is still taught on Okinawa. And he said there were some jujitsu schools that also they were cross training with the Okinawans. And so he believes that that's where a lot of the joint locking and throws and stuff in karate come from. But like I said to Joe Swift, one of the problems again I see with Okinawa is when's the last time I saw an Okinawan karate sensei teach ground fighting? When's the last time I saw them doing a lot of joint locking techniques? When's the last time I saw them doing knife self-defense? And in Tatsuo, like Tatsuo was like Odo. He had that curriculum that he taught to the Marines before they left. And part of the curriculum, there was like 25 self-defense techniques and like 3 to 5 of them were knife defenses, and like 3 or 5 of them were ground fighting techniques. Right. But I hardly ever see an Ishinru guy doing any ground fighting. I hardly ever see them doing any knife defense. Right. And this is one of the things I mean about like where it's karate in Okinawa is becoming like karate in Japan, kicking and punching, and that's it. Right.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's a problem. And for me personally, you talk about having these other experiences, like in your case, jujitsu. So a little over 25 years ago, I started studying Chen style Tai Chi Chuan practical method. And then I also studied Shihe Kwan feeding crane kung fu with Lu Changyi, right? And so I begin to realize that, there's things in our Okinawan karate that are no question come from China. Like some of the moves themselves in Kusanku come from this Chinese martial arts, right? The moves are are very similar. Um, and so what I did was too, I started, trying to bring some of those concepts from China back into the karate. And like Walter Van Gilson, who studied with Tatsuo on Okinawa, he came to one of my seminars one time and he said to me, he says, Mike, I think you're doing what we should have done. You're going back to China and you're looking in that connection between the Okinawan karate and the Chinese martial arts. Because that's one of the things I see is I see the longer it goes on, it looks like the Okinawan karate is getting further and further and further from any of the Chinese influences in it. It's almost like a reverse engineering where it went from Okinawa to Japan. The Japanese changed it and now it's going back to Okinawa as like Japanese version of karate instead of the Okinawans keeping all this depth that was in their original teachings and working on that. So that's one of the things I've been exploring for the last 25 years now. And even people like Lu Changyi, when I first trained with him, he took me on the side and he said, Mike, we know karate had this power. What happened? And I said to him, I said, well, I think the push to sport, and I think World War II hurt karate a lot. We lost a lot of the senior masters. Um, I said, but I think the sport emphasis is what hurts it. Me being a police officer for 22 years, um, if the first time I hit a guy, I didn't hurt him, I'd have to go back in the dojo and say, okay, Mike, what are you doing? Okay, this isn't
mm-hmm.
working. Figure it out. Like I tell people, the first time I tried to do kotagaeshi, the basic wrist lock on a criminal, it didn't work right. But in the dojo, it worked every time. Okay, so obviously And everybody in the dojo said, "Oh, Mike, you have the best joint locks." Okay, well, they mustn't be that good because it didn't work the first time I tried it on a criminal. So then I got a couple of the hardcore guys that I trained with together, and I said, "All right, we got to figure this out. The way we're being shown it isn't right." And we started figuring it out. And that's what I realized. So I realized I had to adjust the techniques, and it taught me a better way to do them. Um, just because, again, maybe the person that showed me had never done that for real. Right. So yeah, I mean, like as a police officer, I used mostly joint locks. Did I have to strike people on occasion? Of course, I struck them plenty of times. But most of the time I'm doing joint locks. Why? Because I'm looking to handcuff, right? I'm looking to
Hmm.
control the guy, right? So and we have the founder of Ishiner on video doing hip throws, joint locks. Um, I know when I've trained with Master Shimabuku, his son, Kichiro Shimabuku, I mean, we've done joint locking techniques. I mean, he did joint locking techniques at one of the world championships because he does a seminar at the world championships. So he did self-defense techniques. I would say there was 200 people in the room. I would say 85% of them had never seen most of those techniques. This is all Ishinru people. And they were looking around like, yeah, because again, what are they doing in their dojos? They're doing kumite, sparring, and they're doing kata. But they're not doing the deep dive into real fighting and self-defense and the deepness of these arts. That's what concerns me. That the real, I mean, Okinawan karate is vast. I mean, when you study a system, a real system, you meet a teacher that actually shows you a lot of stuff. It's like a wow, right? But I'm my worry is that a lot of that's going by the wayside. That they're not teaching the self-defense aspect anymore. Um, I attended a seminar with a 10th Dan from Okinawa in Shorinru, and he showed a fighting application for the last move in the Hanshi, and you could have heard a pin drop. There was 100 of us in the room, and we all just looked at each other like guys were looking at each other like that's complete BS. That would never work. And he started to walk off, and then he realized, and he came back and he showed a second application, and that one wasn't much better than the first one. And afterwards we were all talking about it. And me and Nick Adler were at this thing, and we talked about it afterwards for. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is guys in the West, not just us, in Europe too. I think they're more interested in the old way. They're more interested in the actual self-defense method. They're not just interested in the sport. And like I said, I have no problem with the sport aspect if that's what you want to do, but I don't think we should lose its original intent, because I think once you lose the original intent of everything, you lose it. Like then it's not karate anymore. It's become something else. It's not real karate, you know.
Right, especially in what has become the gold standard for sport execution of kata. Now you have basically WKF metered, um, theatrical, while beautiful to
Right,
watch.
right,
It's not karate.
right.
It's it's something else. It's lost the pauses, uh, aggressive movements. The timing's wrong. It's just not there. And yet that's the thing that people are espousing to perfect their kata, and they're losing the whole thing.
Well, the other thing too is the lack of power.
Yep.
I mean, the power is not the same power that you generate when you want to hit somebody and knock them down, right? I mean,
Yep.
you saw the Olympic competitions, you saw they're actually hitting themselves on the body as they're doing a strike to make a noise. And
Yeah.
again, like I say all the time, if that's what makes you happy, God bless you. I'm all for it. If that makes you happy, go out there and do that. But to me, that's not, like for me, karate's always been about self-defense. Now, again, it's easy for me to say that because my profession for most of my adult life, you know, I had to be able to handle myself. If I didn't handle myself, I didn't come home the next day, right? I was dead, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so my emphasis, and I tell people all the time, people ask me, well, did being a police officer change your karate? And my response is, how could it not? Like, how could
Yes.
being in life and death combat on a regular basis for 22 years, how could that not change my martial arts? Of course it changed my martial arts. It changes this too, right? It just makes you, think, certain things. And, so yeah, that's always been, that's my concern. That's why I'm curious to see what's going on in Okinawa. I was there last in like 2015 or 16. Um, so I'm curious to see what the story is there now. Um, but I've actually been invited to visit the Ryukyu Kobudo Dojo, Akamine Sensei. So I'm hoping to get over there and visit those guys. I met him in 1997. His father was still alive at the time. Um, but I'm hoping to go there. I might be visiting another Matayoshi dojo. Um, and obviously I could be spending time with Kichiro Sensei. Kichiro Sensei's having some health problems. He's got a leg issue, so he can't train right now. But I'm hoping to interview him there while I'm there, sit down and do that. I'm hoping to, he told me last time I could take copies of all the photos he has. So I'm hoping to do that. Um, and I'm going to visit the Kai
That'll
cons.
be that'll be a great opportunity for you there.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's like 83, and I've never really sat down and formally interviewed him. And even if he doesn't want to do it on camera, it doesn't matter, right? But I'll just give you something like the so-called history of Ishinru, right? Um, Tatsuo was approached by the Japanese military, and if you teach us karate, you won't have to fight in the Japanese military. I'm sitting at dinner with Shimabuku Kichiro in London in 2019. It's just me and him. I don't know what made me ask, but I look at him and I go, "Hey, Sensei, I've never asked you, where were you during the war?" And he goes, "Oh, my father took us to Kyushu. He took us to the southernmost island." I go, "Oh." He says, "Yeah, he wanted to get us off the island. He took us there because he felt it would be safer." And he said a lot of Okinawans made that trip, but they died on the way. They got torpedoed. The boat got sunk. He said, "We were lucky and we made it." And I said, "When'd you come back to Okinawa?" He says, "After the war." So again, like these crazy histories that get written that have no basis in reality, right? Um, recently it's come to light that, Tatsuo trained with Miyagi Chojun first. And Miyagi Chojun introduced him to Kion Sensei. And actually, you'll see when you go to Okinawa next year at the Karate Kaikon, they have plaques of the famous karate masters. And they have Tatsuo's plaque, and it actually says that on Tatsuo's plaque in the Kaikon. So they firmly believe that. Their historians there have said they believe Tatsuo trained with Miyagi Sensei first. And, so it's just interesting, like Andreas Quast, Yannick Schultz, Motobu Naoki, all these other guys, these young guys that are doing this research and really taking deep dives and looking at microfilm, old newspaper articles, old books, old writings that they're finding. It's just great that this stuff is coming to light. It's great for us. I mean, I'm like an armchair historian. I get to sit back and benefit from all these guys' work, right? Um, but yeah,
yes.
it's great that they're doing this stuff. I mean, Motobu Naoki, I actually pay for his monthly Patreon. He has a Patreon, it's like $5 a month. And he's constantly translating these old documents. And not just on Motoburu, not just on his family's art, but on everything. So his stuff's very
Hmm.
good, the stuffs he's coming out with. And I would love to get him to come on the podcast at some point. I don't know if that's possible, but I would love to have him come on. Um, but yeah, so and so
When you get over there, make copies of all the photos you can.
I'm
I
gonna
had
I'm
I had an opportunity. It was uh, one of those things that while I went through it, it wasn't fun, but afterwards, it was the best thing that ever happened. Was in '84, uh, we got hit with a lawsuit, threatened with a lawsuit over
okay.
the trademark Okinawa Ken.
Okay.
Uh, and Teruyuki Higa had trademarked it
Okay.
and threatened Oyata, threatened Odo, and everything. That's why Oyata changed to Ryukyu Kempo,
Right.
avoided that. Uh, we fought it, a 2 year court battle. But one of the beautiful things out of that was I spent time in Okinawa. Zenro Shimabuku was very helpful, but I got to go through all of Odo's documentation. I had copies of all his certificates,
Great.
every one that he had. And it's like a who's who of the martial arts that he had been involved with. I got a copy of the scroll from the Kuniyoshi family, from Sakayama all the way down through to Nakamura. Um, so those are like priceless things that I
Right.
never would have ever seen,
Right.
let alone have copies.
Right.
Uh, and we ended up winning the suit anyway, so I own the name.
Yeah. It's
But we
interesting.
made it that
Yeah.
anybody who had a legitimate teacher's license from one of the Okinawa Kempo people had total protection under the lawsuit to use the name.
Right.
And Higa couldn't try to hang him up for money, etc.
Yeah. Higa Sensei is a guy who lost his way a little bit, I think.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
I mean, it
But
happens. People start going down a certain path, and you know, so it doesn't matter. And it's one of the things I say. It doesn't matter if you're Okinawan, Japanese, Chinese, Western. It doesn't matter.
mm-hmm.
There's good and bad and all in it, and people decide to take a certain route to things, and it's not necessarily a good thing. I'm glad you guys won a lawsuit, because there was a similar thing with Sosu Ishido Jiu-Jitsu with Nelson Mitch Fleming, who was the first non-Japanese to study the art, and Jackie Stern, who I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a martial
No,
arts
no,
guy,
no.
but he was also a guy. He's passed away now, but he was a guy who'd been charged with stolen valor. He claimed to be a Medal of Honor winner. So he was not a good
No.
guy, and he did the same thing. He trademarked the style stuff, and Nelson Fleming lost it in court, and he had to change the name. Um, so yeah, and but again, you look at what happened with Jackie Stern, claimed to be a Medal of Honor winner, was never even, I don't think, in the service, and eventually got himself in big trouble and died in disgrace. This disgraceful human being, right? So, but that did, I know for a fact that soured Sensei Fleming on things in the States. Just soured him on it a little bit, which probably affected the growth of the Sosu Ishido. Because the Sosu Ishido Jiu-Jitsu right now, mm, I'm probably being kind in saying maybe there's 50 people practicing it worldwide.
Wow.
It's very, very small. It's this close to dying out. So, which is a problem. It's a problem anytime these arts, are on that precipice, So I'm hoping to go visit the headquarters next year in Fukuoka and maybe get some things going with it. Maybe, see if they want to try some different things. But you know, I know my teacher is not well health wise, but his son now is probably in about 30, about my son's age. No, probably a little older than my son, mid 30s. And I know he trains, so hopefully maybe get his interest and maybe, at some point bring him here where we can start, getting this art to flourish again. But it's tough. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many arts they lose now in Japan. Every year they're losing arts that are just ceasing to exist, you know, because they're having the same problems they're having in Okinawa. The Okinawans want to paint this rosy picture that there's a lot of people training in martial arts there, but it's not what they claim. I mean, a lot of the dojo are saying they're not. And you look at a lot of the dojo, you see a lot of older people training. You're not seeing that many, young people training, which is a problem. So, um, but hopefully it'll turn it around. I know now that the tourism, a lot of people are going to Okinawa from all over the world to train. That much I know. So in terms of that, it's been a good thing. It's bringing a lot of people. A lot of people are going to Okinawa. So, you know, and you can rent the Kaikon and do seminars there.
Hmm.
So people are doing that. They're renting it 2 years in advance, and they plan it, and people fly in from all over the world, and people hold a seminar there. I think McCarthy Sensei just did it, and someone else just did it too. I'm not too sure who else. So it's something I'm considering doing for Ishinru in a few years. I'm going to think about it and maybe
Good.
look to do something there in Okinawa for Ishinru. So, well, listen, I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, this was great.
Yeah, this was great. I
Thank
really
you for
appreciate
having,
it.
and it was
I
good talking with.
Yeah, I say all the time, this podcast has grown into something I never expected it to grow into, but it's good. And for me, it's who I want to talk to, meaning like, I'm like, oh yeah, I think I'll talk to this guy. I'll interview this guy. Um, and so it's great because I'm doing it because I enjoy it. Like I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy talking to these different people, right? And but it's good. A lot of people like it. A lot of people watch the podcast and they like it. And then someone will reach out for me and say, "Hey, maybe you should try to like I'd love to have Bill Hayes on."
Oh, he's fantastic.
But I don't I tried reaching out for him. I didn't get a response. So I don't know if you have a way I can.
Get with him. He's a member of our executive board, and we have him up to our annual trainings and our winter camps. Excellent teacher.
Yeah,
Excellent.
mate, if you could maybe reach out to him for me and see, I'd love to talk to him because he trained with Eizo Shimabuku. I'd love to talk to
Yes.
him about that.
Yeah.
You know, um, so maybe after I get back from Okinawa, I'll remind you, and maybe you can help me hook up with him.
Yeah. I'll come up for you.
I'd appreciate it. So, tell your wife I said hi.
I will.
All right,
You
and
take care.
yeah, and if anything comes up, something new you want to talk about or anything, reach out. I'd love to have you on again.
Okay. Great. Thank
All
you.
right. All right, Bruce.
You
Good
take
talking
care.
to you.
God
All right.
bless you.
Hope you enjoyed that interview. I know I enjoyed talking to Heilman Sensei. Guy's a wealth of knowledge and has been around a while and interesting to hear his insights and his beliefs on certain things. So very happy that I interviewed him. Please, again, if you liked it, like, share, subscribe button. Consider becoming a monthly member. All right. We've surpassed 15,000 subscribers, so that's great. We actually have surpassed over 5 million views for the channel. So really, really appreciate all of you sticking with me and hanging in there. All right. So I'll see you when I get back, hopefully with some interesting stories about Okinawa. All right. Take care.